This is historian Stephen Ujifusa. Welcome to Wet Lunch on the High Seas. Some thoughts on transition and change right now. The historian Henry Adams famously said that chaos was the law of nature, order was the dream of man. And right now we're living through a period that can be described as transition and chaos, in which things that we took for granted are being shifted around scarily beneath our feet. Things that we trusted in, such as the attacks on institutions like Harvard University, uh, which we thought, many of us thought, were permanent and unchanging, are very disconcerting. Things such as USAID and all these institutions that were established during the last century, during the American century. And as disturbing as this all is, and as scary as it is to seeing things that we took for granted as permanent are, I think as human beings, we have to look for opportunity and ways to grow because we cannot hold on to what is uh, passing away. We can adapt, but we cannot live in the past. And as an historian, I have come to an important realization in my studies is that there are too often extreme approaches that people take. One is the approach of we need to bulldoze everything and rebuild anew. This was something that was done through programs of urban renewal in the mid 20th century, in which whole neighborhoods were destroyed. Old slums and tenements, brownstone districts in cities like New York and Philadelphia and Boston, to build the city of the future, a dream that was first laid out in the 1939 uh, World's Fair of this utopian city. It was also uh, promulgated by thinkers such as Le Corbusier. And this is the destruction wholesale of the built environment. And this also applies to human thought as well. We could see this with groups such as the Khmer Rouge, which puts people en masse into re-education camps to create the new man. This is something that's done by authoritarians, both on the far left and the far right, that we can magically shape human nature through biology and re-education. And if we can't do that, then people are exterminated. Those that cannot be reformed are exterminated. This was brought to its bloodiest and most scientific use by the Nazis, but has been imitated by many other regimes, such as Maoist China, Stalinist Russia. The other route is to preserve intact against the chaos of the world and change the old ways. And this is sort of a way of, I guess you could say, historic preservation has a lot of its roots in this. And it's a movement to which I'm very sympathetic when it comes to preserving the past. But it could also veer dangerously into idealization and nostalgia. And we have in the past have had nostalgia for, say, the founding era, late 18th century in America, uh, other epochs in American history. But now I think what we have to be mindful of, as unfortunate as it is, as the America that existed between 1989, 1990, and pretty much 2020 through 2020, I guess you could say 2021, with the January 6th insurrection, does not exist anymore. And that doesn't mean that the bones aren't any good and that we've lost everything. I think that's a very extremist way to think. But I think that we are unused to chaos. Those of us who grew up, um, I'm a Generation Xer, who grew up in the 1990s or 2000s. And we are unused to chaos. And Henry Adams is right. Throughout most of human history, chaos and dynastic struggle and uncertainty were the norm rather than the rule. I think that what we have to do in this new era is, first of all, maintain faith and hope, because without it, we fall into nihilism. We fall into grabbing what we can. Uh, and this goes against the basic pretext of civilization. But I think that we have to maintain faith in the future, but also not say, okay, well, because things aren't going my way, the past is all bad and it must be forgotten. No, no, no. There are important lessons that must be taken from the past. And I think an example to look at is how Harvard University and Alan Garber are taking an important role in the evolution of a new American ethos and the new role of the American university. Harvard was beset with problems before this happened. I will not deny that I was deeply disturbed by the reaction on October 8th at Harvard before the offensive in Gaza and all its horrors began. And Alan Garber took over an institution that was beset with problems in spite of its tremendous wealth and prestige. I think Alan Garber is, in classic Theodore Roosevelt fashion, basically saying to everyone, this university is willing to take a bloody nose. It's willing to lose some of its treasure, but better that it stand up for its principles than to become a vassal of the federal government. And I think that Harvard and a lot of institutions like it, they will emerge from this financially weakened, but perhaps smarter, leaner, and more focused on what really matters, providing a liberal education to people in America and all over the world. And I think if I was the president of Harvard, and I do not have a PhD, but in light of all the unrest and fight that's going on campus, I would say you might disagree. You might have strong opinions. I understand that. But at the end of the day, we are a community. We are a university. We are a place where we might have disagreements, but we also have to understand that we come from, if you want to create a community of scholars, students from all over the country, all over the world, to exist in a single community, we have to be united by a single ideal. And we might vehemently disagree with people, but what separates us from the chaos of the outside world is that we are a community. Without that, then what do you have? You have a bunch of warring factions struggling over resources, status, and prestige. And I think that's the model that I think these universities, once they come out of this ordeal, will be able to uphold. Maybe they were getting too fancy. The aesthetic that I would describe these universities when I see them, especially my alma mater, was McKinsey modern, slick modern, and very expensive. Maybe a bit of shabbiness and frugality, focus on the life of the mind and civil discourse and community would mean a lot more than shiny student centers and gleaming new buildings and an emphasis on titles. And that's something that money, $50 billion, cannot buy. And also, I think that Alan Garber has said that nothing could buy integrity and independence. And on the off chance that Harvard does go down in this fight, I think that at least it kept its good name or tried to make itself better. So who knows what the next few years will bring? As personally, I've experienced a lot of loss and transition over the past few years. But you have no choice but to go on. You owe it to your family, you owe it to your friends. I was listening to an interview of my two of my great aunts who were uh, both of whom, well, the last of whom has recently died, but they were the sisters of my grandmother. They were the daughters of immigrant Japanese who faced violent, verbally violent racism in their small town in Colorado. They were poor, and being Japanese American was not a great place, not a great position to be in 1920s and 1930s Colorado. In fact, these two aunts were sent back to Japan in the late 1930s because the family was preparing to go back to Japan. They were born here. But then they experienced so much racism and suspicion for being Americans that they decided to come back, and they caught the last boat back to the United States before Pearl Harbor. But listening to their words, they experienced tremendous privation, racism. But my great grandmother, Suti, who came to America as a picture bride and barely knew her husband, didn't know her husband at all. I wouldn't exactly say it was an ideal marriage. They raised many children together. But Grandma Suti's motto was persevere, you have to make do. And I derive tremendous strength from their example and what they gave to me and my children in terms of the ability to persevere, take it on the chin, get up, and keep going. And I think that that's what will get us through this period of transition and this period of great uncertainty. We've been through far worse, and life goes on. We have to also realize that at the end of the day, it's your friends and family, in my opinion, that will protect you above all any government structure. And we have to ride it out as best we can. And I'm grateful to my great grandparents and my great aunts for setting that example. So thank you so much for listening. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa for Wet Lunch on the High Seas.